Hello and welcome back to Tachikawa. You are listening to Sakamichi Nights. My name is Matthew Boynton and I am joined, as always, by Daniel Bellamy. Daniel, it's getting warmer. It's possible to sleep all night with the window open these days.
Yep.
What do you look forwards to as the weather warms up?
Eventually, the pollen goes away.
Okay.
And my life goes back to normal.
Are you a particularly heavy hay fever sufferer?
I am, yeah. I thought it was just the Sugi, and I thought the Sugi was mostly gone. And so a couple days ago, I very cleverly decided not to take my hay fever medicine in the evening. And it turns out it was not. I thought it was. At the time, I was like, man, look at me. What a clever boy I'm being. I regret that decision a lot.
Well, we can all look forward to rainy season when you'll be as happy as Larry because there'll be no pollen at all. It'll be washed away by the relentless rain. How was your day today?
It was great. I had a great day today. I haven't really been cycling up here too much. Been pretty busy and caught up with other things, and so I haven't been doing it as much as I would like. Also, I mean, for the last week or so, the wind has been unbelievable.
Blowing all that pollen in.
Yeah, blowing all the pollen, first of all, but like as you know, cycling into a wind is not a good time.
Very dispiriting.
For anybody, yeah. But anyway, today conditions seemed right. The wind was not too strong. It was a beautiful day, as I would assume people know. So I decided to ride up here today.
Today being Thursday, the 13th of April.
Thoroughly.
Well, thoroughly, there must be more to this story.
I think in the past we have complained a bit about cycling and drivers and things like that, different things that happen on the ride. Today I had a really incredible ride. I had a whole bunch of really nice interactions with the large vehicles around me. I'm not being sarcastic at all. There were a number of times where I was kind of approaching an intersection and there was a truck ahead of me that was going to turn kind of across my path. And they were far enough ahead of me that they could have done it and I would have had to slow down and stop, but I would have understood. Like they were ahead of me and I was behind them. And on a few different occasions, they fully stopped and just waited for me to get up there and go past in front of them. I really appreciate that.
That's pretty cool. How did you know that they were stopping to let you go ahead and not just trying to entrap you into the zone of death?
Because I'm still alive.
Okay.
So
that's a good sign.
I feel like proof of life is
But did they kind of wave to you or anything, or they saw you made eye contact? I'm always nervous passing a truck on the inside.
Yeah, well, when I came up to the intersection, I generally saw them either looking at me in the mirror or...
Right.
One time I was actually on the right. Don't judge me. It's a very short bit of street that crosses a road and goes over to the Tamagawa cycle path. And it's literally like 15 meters that I have to ride on the other side. So I ride up there. So the truck driver was on the left, and we had the green light, and he was going to turn right. So he saw me on that side, on the wrong side coming up. And even though I was being a scofflaw, he still respected my life and waited for me.
Right. Well, you were in the right, but not in the right.
Yeah.
And then he was right to let you go past on the right.
So here's my thing. When people are... a lot of times when people often just do the normal thing, there was another time where a truck just stayed behind me for a while because it wasn't safe to pass.
Right.
And unusual. That's kind of unusual. That's what's expected. That's the bare minimum.
I'm not going to squeeze past.
Don't endanger my life.
Almost kill you.
Yeah. But it's rare, right? You know that people get impatient. And so when that kind of stuff happens, some of these instances today were... more than I would expect from the drivers. And so in those cases, I'm always going to wave and be like, hey, thanks, man. Give them a thumbs up or something. But there are also times when people do what is literally the legal requirement and the bare minimum to have respect for me as a squishy human life, and not try and murder me, not put ourselves in a situation where I could die. I still thank those people because, as you know, it's kind of rare. Right. I always have a little bit of weird feeling about it because it's again, as I said, you have done the bare minimum and you've done what you're legally required to do, but I still thank people for it anyway.
Positive reinforcement.
Yeah, that's my feeling. Is I do sometimes let people know the reverse when I'm unhappy with their performance on the road and their life choices and how it relates to me. So I feel like it's important to balance that out by letting people know thanking people and letting them know that I appreciate it when they drive safely around me, even if it is just the bare minimum.
Absolutely not trying to murder you, actively trying to murder you.
Right. I gotta thank those people because that's a special experience.
So the drivers of Tokyo get both the carrot and the stick in these situations.
I think it's important, you know.
I was once coming back from cycling up in Okutama direction and coming down the main road from Ome back towards where I live.
It's busy that way.
It is busy, and coming down the hill, there were two very large dump trucks behind me, which was making me nervous. But I noticed, maybe as you did today, that they were being very polite. Like, they were giving me lots of space.
Right.
They were waiting behind me, like at the light. They weren't trying to squeeze past to get to the light first. And not trying to overtake me, even though it was quite narrow, not trying to just get in front no matter what. And I was thinking, this is unusual. This is not the behavior that I would expect from these two truck drivers. And it wasn't until I reached the end of the road bit and I was going to turn off and get back on the cycle path that I saw the reason why.
You had no pants on.
Well, yes, but that wasn't the reason why, because that's always true. There was a police car behind them. And so they were aware that they had to be absolutely on their best behavior.
Right.
You
don't know
we could
that
be generous.
for sure.
Yeah, we could be generous and say that they were going to do that anyway.
Right.
And it was just a coincidence that there was a police car behind them.
Right.
But yeah, it's, as you say, it is a nice surprise when drivers don't actively try and murder you in Tokyo.
Yeah. Yeah, I try and spread the positivity in those situations and hope that like other drivers will see that I'm appreciative. I'm not trying to block traffic, right? I'm just trying to get where I'm going, and that I appreciate the people who are being safe around me.
This, we both have something of a background in children's education, right? This is one of the lessons you learn, right? If kids are acting up in class, don't scold them, but instead praise the kids who are doing well, who are doing what they're supposed to be doing. You're taking the same approach to Tokyo drivers.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure it's working.
One driver at a time. How many can there be? Like 100? Probably not that many.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Well, positivity, encouragement, the carrot rather than the stick, that's absolutely what we're all about on Sakamichi Nights. This is a place to celebrate carrots and to celebrate beer.
Yep.
What is the beer, or the beers, that we are going to be celebrating this week?
This is a very special week. I'm sure we've done this beer before, but we couldn't remember if we had or not. But we must have.
We must have.
This week, we are going to celebrate the venerable, the lauded Shibasaki Session.
Wow.
You might call it our Teiban.
Our flagship Session IPA. But it's not just any normal celebration of Shibasaki Session. We have brewed 2 batches of this beer on our system here in Tachikawa. And today we are going to be tasting them both to compare, to see whether or not we actually can brew a beer that tastes the same twice. So prepare yourselves to dive in with us into 2 glasses of Shibasaki Session. As I was just saying in the break, Shibasaki Session is probably the beer that I have drunk most of any one beer now in my life.
Yeah, that might be true for me as well.
Even so, it's nice to come back and to revisit. Often you're drinking it just without a lot of thoughts. You're not drinking it mindfully. And at Sakamichi Nights, we're all about mindfulness.
Yep.
I want you to be absolutely in the moment right now.
In the beer, yeah.
Take your shirt off and tell me what you think about these 2 beers.
All right, pants are off. So, I think I've actually been drinking a glass of last gen Shibasaki Session in the lead up to this.
Volume 7.
Volume 7. So it's pretty heavy on my palate right now. And it tastes like what you would expect. Are we going into how does Shibasaki Session taste?
Yeah, why not?
Okay, why not?
For all of our new listeners, what does Shibasaki Session taste like?
Well, it's a session IPA. It's 4.5%. And for me, the issue that I have with a lot of session IPAs, they don't have a ton of character to them or depth. They always seem kind of thin. And the whatever kind of flavor and aroma is evident in them finishes quite quickly. And one of the reasons I really like Shibasaki Session is because it has quite a lot of complexity and bitter bite to it, and it lingers quite a long time for a low alcohol beer. I think that's quite interesting and quite tasty for me. It's not overly fruity, but there is a little bit of kind of bitter citrus in there, like bitter grapefruit, and it's got a little bit of dankness as well. It's a little hazy. It's kind of like a yellowy orangey color, but you can't really see through it. I wouldn't necessarily call it a hazy, but it's certainly leaning that direction.
Yeah, it is. It looks hazy, but it doesn't really match the flavor profile of a hazy beer.
It's not overly juicy.
Right. But yeah, a lot of citrus, quite a bit of dankness, surprisingly bitter. It's got a nice kind of bitter bite to it.
I really like that.
That is the base level Shibasaki Session. So in front of us we have the Volume 7 and the Volume 8. Do you think these taste the same, or do they taste radically different?
I think they taste a little different. I think that it seems to me, and this is just my perception, and again, like I said, I'm halfway through a full glass of last gen Shib Sesh.
Yep.
So it's possible that is kind of imprinted pretty hard on my palate right now. It seems like the new one has slightly less of a bitter snap, or slightly, I don't know how to describe it. Like the bitterness on the back end of the previous generation seems a little more full or more rounded somehow, and the bitterness on the new one, the new batch that's coming in, seems a little bit lighter in some ways. But the mouthfeel, to me, interestingly, seems the new one seems a little more lively, and that might just be an age question too, right? How long it's been in the keg. I would say Shib Sesh has always been eminently crushable, but I would say that this new version seems to have reached heightened levels of crushability.
You've turned the crushability up to 11.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It's a lot of crushability.
For those of you who don't have PhDs in crushability like you and I.
It's a 9.8 on the Crusher Richter scale.
Yeah.
I think I agree with you. Looking at the two of them, they look almost completely identical, which is good. That's a good start.
Right.
The aroma, I think, very, very similar. But there is a very slight difference in just the punch of each of them. I think I agree with you on that one. And I will give you a prize if you can tell me either one of the two things that were different in this recipe of Shibasaki Session.
Well, I know the yeast has got to be the same, because that adds a lot to this beer, I believe.
Please continue.
I'm pretty sure. I'm going to take a stab in the dark. I would say that maybe due to reasons, the bittering hop is different.
No, it's not. It's not different. I will tell you that the hops are all the same.
Okay, interesting. My other guess, and this is kind of a stab in the dark, is there more wheat in the malt bill?
There is not. No.
Is there any wheat in it?
Yes, Shibasaki Session does have about 5% wheat. Right. You're right, though, that the malt is slightly, subtly different. We started using a new kind of malt in here recently, within the last few months. Do you remember what it is? You milled some of it today.
The sour
malt. Right. That's right, yes. So this new version has sour malt in it. We don't want to get super into the technical weeds on this, but we add a little bit of sour malt to the grist bill in order to lower the pH of the mash and get a better extraction from the grain. The enzymes work better in a certain pH range, and so we use some sour malt to achieve that pH range. I don't know how much that carries through, but this version of Shibasaki Session has a slightly lower pH than the previous one. Maybe that makes it more juice-like, more juicy.
It's a tricky one to compare for a number of reasons. And one, like, I still drink this pretty regularly. I will have, if I'm going to have a beer of a night, I do go back to Shib Sesh pretty regularly as an old standby. And so that means that I've been drinking this batch across its lifespan. And so when you do that, it's like watching your own kids grow up. You don't really see them grow so much, right? You look at a picture and you're like, oh man, like you're way bigger than you used to be, right? Like you see it. But
Shibasaki Sessions used to be so small. I'm looking at their old shoes right now.
That's right,
There's a tear in my eye.
We've been measuring them on the measuring stick taped to the door. But you know what I mean, right? Like it's hard for me to imagine what this batch tasted like when we first put it on tap.
Yeah.
Because I've been drinking it continuously. And beers do change. Like we obviously keep it cold. We keep it in good condition. But I have been tasting it change incrementally and not necessarily noticing it glass by glass. So we have a fresh batch and we have an older batch. Not fresh, but
it's 3 months old.
3 months old. Yeah, I mean that's still going to be totally fine and delicious. So, but comparing the two of those, there are going to be some subtle changes to the beer over 3 months. And comparing that to an absolutely fresh, like kegged, yesterday batch, 2 days ago batch, there's going to be some differences in there. But I don't remember what the original batch tasted like fresh. So it's difficult to pinpoint what is due to recipe changes, what is due to 3 months of controlled aging.
Yeah, I think I've misspoken actually. I think the previous batch is only 2 months old. We packaged it in February.
Right, that's right. We didn't brew it straight away, did we?
Yeah,
so you're right.
There's really not much between these two.
Right.
And they've been in the fridge the entire time.
Sure.
So, shall I tell you the other thing that's different?
Yeah, sorry.
It is different yeast. It is a different yeast.
Really?
Yeah, we previously used Lallemand Voskvik yeast in all of this, but I have been experimenting with a new supplier recently, and we're using Thermo Ale Horndal Kvik. So it's still a Kvik yeast, but a slightly different Kvik yeast.
Okay.
And so maybe it's bringing out a few more of the juicy characters,
right,
combined with the slightly lower pH. That might be what's turning the crushability up on this batch of Shibasaki Session. You know what? They say that... not Brian Eno. Brian, who's the guy from the Beach Boys?
Brian Phillips.
Brian, no. It's not Brian Warner. Brian
Wilson.
He never finished any album, right? He just, at some point, he was like, okay, that'll do. We have to print it. We have to press these LPs. So I'll say that whatever mix I've got now is the one that we will send to the things. But he kept mixing them and he kept working on them even after they'd been sent to the pressers. I think it's the same with Shibasaki Session. Not to compare myself to Brian Wilson or to the Beach Boys, because he was
Brian Phillips.
I don't know who Brian Phillips is. Is that a basketball player?
Probably.
Inventor of the Phillips screwdriver. Not to compare myself to any of those people, but I don't think we'll ever stop tinkering with Shibasaki Session and searching for more crushability.
So I was going to ask you about that. Is that... Don't you think that you reach a point with the beer, and I don't necessarily mean in terms of your creativity and how you want it to be, but I think one of our kind of ideas for this beer was that it in future that it's the beer in Tachikawa.
Right.
That if you go into any kind of bar or restaurant or izakaya, that they have Shibasaki Session in cans.
Yeah.
And I feel like if you have that kind of spread, at some point you need to lock in a recipe, at least for a couple of years, that you can't be making it different every batch. For now, I think it's kind of fine to tinker and play around with things. But if you reach a point where it is a recognizable brand, then I think when people order it, they want it to be the same thing they had last time. What's your feeling about that?
I can absolutely see where you're coming from. I would also say that we are drinking 2 different batches of this side by side, and there are some very subtle differences, but I think if we weren't drinking both of these together, we wouldn't be able to tell which one was which, right? I've tinkered with the recipe a little bit, but what I'm talking about is not changing the hops or changing the malt bill or doing anything radical like that, but just dialing in, chasing zeros, as it were, chasing the crushability zeros. How precise, how scientifically crushable is it possible to make a beer? It's already pretty crushable, right? It's already an 11, but can we make it an 11.1? We're talking Olympic level crushability here. It's all measured in milliseconds.
Right.
I'm really mixing some metaphors now.
Let's go.
So one other thing there are actually three things that are different about this. One other thing that I changed a little bit was the brewing salts that we used. I changed slightly changed the proportion of brewing salts that we used to accentuate the hoppiness a little bit more. And we're getting into some really tiny differences here. But I wouldn't like to think that we will be completely reinventing this beer. It's not going to be a new Coke situation. But it might be possible to slightly dial up the crushability with every iteration of it. And so people keep enjoying it. It is recognizably the same beer, but it's getting slightly better every time. The other thing I would mention is that because we're dealing with live ingredients, as it were, hops, malt, things that change from year to year and harvest to harvest, some slight changes may be unavoidable for us. Right, if we have a year when the Amarillo comes out kind of different, that is the character hop of this beer.
Right.
So there's no way around it. It is going to change slightly, and maybe we decide to mitigate that change by altering the hop bill slightly, or maybe we decide to lead into that change and accentuate a different character of the Shibasaki Session at that point. It depends. We would have to wait and see. But I think some change is inevitable.
Sure, absolutely. I just think the idea of we're always going to make it better. Better is subjective, right?
Yes, and it's also.
I think that's probably what Brian Wilson understood.
Yes.
Was that, I can keep chasing some ideal in my head, but it's good enough. And the ideal in my head might not be better than this. Let's just, at some point, you just have to send it, right?
Yes.
And if you're, constantly changing it, constantly trying to make it better in your mind, but at some point, people come to certain products for consistency, right? Your relationship with certain brands is based on consistency. You don't want to have a different tasting Coke every time you open it.
I do. I want to roll the dice.
Something weird.
Oh my God, this one's green.
Anyway, we could get real philosophical about it.
No, I totally see your point. And I think the kind of changes, the kind of tinkering that I'm talking about are very minor and the kind of thing that probably only I would notice are different because I know what has gone into each one that makes it different. But to almost everybody else will be basically imperceptible. But yeah, it's also Brian Wilson did suffer for his art. I'm not sure if he was really a happy man when he was searching those zeros. You might be right that at some point you just have to go, you know what, that one's done.
Right. I'm insane. This beer is good enough.
Let's move on to something else instead. Speaking of moving on to something else, we always like to pair the beers whenever we taste them. So why don't we spin the wheel of pairings this week and find out what we will be pairing both versions of Shibasaki Session with. Of course, it can't be what we had in the last 2 episodes.
2 episodes ago, excuse me.
No, go for it.
I'm going to go for it. 2 episodes ago was Wildcard.
We can do that again.
Yeah. So video game was last week. So it can't be video game.
Okay, not going to be video game. What's it going to be? Drinking companion. So who would you like to be drinking a Shibasaki Session with while you're on your tube?
I would like to drink this with my father while tubing.
Okay. Can you expand on that?
Sure. I mean, it's my dad. He's a good dude. We have a pretty good relationship, I think. And this is the first beer that we made. We've had it on tap almost continuously since we opened, so it's kind of a special beer for us. Also, I think it's a pretty tasty beer. So my dad doesn't drink either, so
right.
This is entirely in the realm of podcast pairings. This is not something that will ever happen in real life.
It's not that he is going to be watching you crush several pints of
Shibasaki
Session.
Maybe that's it. Yeah, let's go tubing, and I'm going to get absolutely trashed. Make sure I don't die.
If I recall correctly, when we first opened, the artwork we had on our walls was by your dad as well.
That's right, yeah.
So quite a good synergy there. The original artwork together with the original beer.
Yeah,
Sakamichi Brewing.
I mean, I think if I'm going to share a beer with my parents, this is a good one to start off with.
Yeah, you probably want to make sure you're holding the paintings up away from the water as you're going down the river.
Man, it's getting complex. This is great. I like it. Right, so I'm there with my dad, drinking Shib Sesh.
He's holding the paintings.
He's holding the paintings.
Maybe he's doing a painting.
He can hold, he can, because he's not drinking.
Yep.
So I'm getting trashed. We're on a river. He's painting. There's a hot air balloon somewhere involved.
Yep. The Blue Strike Festival is just about to begin.
The Blue Strike, that's it. That's exactly what it's called. Yeah, anyway, that's my pairing. What do you got?
I would just like to savor that image for a moment more before I come out with my answer. Quite the picture that your dad has painted there. I would like to drink this beer together with you, Daniel Bellamy.
Oh.
How sweet.
You're going to turn it somehow.
No, that's it. We started the business together. This is the first ever beer that we made together as Sakamichi Brewing, and I think it's fun that we can still enjoy basically what was our first beer. Like a lot of places will do a beer and then immediately abandon it and go on to develop other recipes.
Right.
But I'm quite proud of the fact that we've been able to carry this one through basically since inception, since Sakamichi Brewing was a thing, and we can both still drink and enjoy it.
It's been a good beer, I think. The recipe was tweaked a bit here and there, like a little bit more drastically in the beginning to kind of address some things. Initially, we had no head retention, right? We had to make some changes.
The first ever
it.
batch, yes.
The original batch. But it's been a solid base recipe from the start, I think. Had a few kind of tweaks to dial it in. So we've had a few beers, I think, that were not our favorites, like between you and I.
Right.
They were still good, and customers still liked them, and we still enjoyed them and drank a lot of them, but they weren't exactly what we hoped they would be. So I think it's kind of cool that the first beer that we made is something that we still have on, that we still enjoy drinking, and is largely the same recipe with some tweaks and changes here and there for different reasons. That's really cool.
Yeah.
Because if that one had been one of, I don't want to, not necessarily clunker, but if that had been one that you and I were not as happy with, that would be a little bit of a bummer, right? We just kind of like let it fade into the background. The fact that the first beer is something that we both still really enjoy drinking, I think that's cool.
Yeah, I'm glad it wasn't a stinker, and that it is kind of the beer that we present ourselves with a lot of times. If we go to events, or when we have the summer festival here in Tachikawa, this is the beer that we are serving to a lot of people, isn't it? Whenever we have our anniversary event, Shib Sesh goes on sale for 500 yen.
Yeah.
Or at least that has been the case up to now. So it's often the first Sakamichi beer that people try. Appropriately enough, also the first Sakamichi beer that we made. It all works together. Anyway, it's a good beer. This batch is very slightly different. We've turned the crushability up to 11. Tune in next time to see if we can turn the crushability up to 12.
Oh.
Is such a thing even possible? Brewery update. Today was a brew day.
Yep.
In the brewery.
Mm-hmm.
We were brewing.
Yep. That's what a brew day is. Yep.
We made some beer and it's in the tank. Look forward to a secret 3-way collaborative project between us, Anglo-Japanese Brewing, and Open Air, coming soon to a galaxy far, far away. But yeah, that one is in the tank today. I thought it might be fun, seeing as today was a brew day, to actually briefly go through what the brewing process is.
Okay.
It's fresh in my mind.
Yeah.
Just did it today.
That's good. So you should know what you're talking about.
I should.
Right.
You would certainly hope so. There are 4 or 5 steps to it. We'll figure out the details as we go along. So why don't I briefly explain what each of the steps are in how to make beer, and then you chime in with some interesting and informed questions.
Right. Or insults.
Or both.
Okay.
Anything beginning with I.
Great.
So, making beer. The first step is crushing the grains.
Crushability.
Milling the grains.
Step 1 for crushability.
You get your grains, you run them through the mill. At our scale, we tend to do this on the morning of the brew. If you get quite a bit bigger than us, then this is something that you might do the day before, just because it takes so much time to mill all the grains that it's not practical to do it and brew beer on the same day.
Right.
But once you crush them grains, they're going bad almost immediately, right? You've opened them up, the oxygen can get in, they can start to oxidize, and that's bad. So once you've milled them, you want to use them as quickly as possible. And today, this was actually your job, wasn't it? You were milling the grains together with friend of Sakamichi, Matt.
Beardo
Matt, confusingly. How was the milling today?
Yeah, it was good. Successful. We milled them grains.
You milled all the damn grains.
We have I guess a decent sized mill. I don't know. I don't go around checking out other people's mills.
Yeah, it's pretty good.
It's a decent size, I think, for our operation. It does what we need it to, right?
Chews through the grain pretty quickly.
Pretty big hopper. Yeah. It seems that we get a good mill. You can adjust the grind setting, right? Can't you? And you don't want it too crushed.
No.
Right? You're not increasing crushability by crushing the grains more, is what I'm saying.
No, you may even be decreasing crushability.
Right.
So the fineness to which you mill the grains is something that you need to dial in. You want them to be completely cracked open so that the water can get inside them, but not completely pulverized into dust. Because then when you do mix them with hot water, which, spoiler alert, is the next step, it's basically just turned into a glue-like sludge in the mash tun.
That's bad.
And it will be impossible to separate the liquid from the sludge.
Right.
That is the next step. We call that mashing in. You've got to mix these crushed grains together with some hot water that you have carefully worked out the temperature of in order to achieve the mash, which is where you mix hot water and the grains. And then enzymes that are already present in the grain will convert all of that starch that's in there into delicious sugars. I'm pausing now to allow you to chime in with your interesting, informed questions.
And insults. What is my interesting, informed question here? What kind of temperatures are you looking for?
That's an excellent question, because this is really important. The enzymes that are present in the malt work best in the sort of 65 to 68 degrees Celsius range. But if you want a beer with more body, you will mash at a higher temperature.
Right.
And if you want a beer that is drier, you will mash at a slightly lower temperature. So temperature control is key here.
And if you have a bigger, kind of more automated system, there's a lot more control over the temperature.
Yes.
I mean, we have a fair amount of control as well, but we're bringing the water from what's called the hot liquor tank, which, despite its name, is full of water.
Correct.
We have that heated up already to 80 degrees. Is that correct?
It depends on how hot we want the grains to be.
Right. So you're bringing that water across, and it's losing some of that heat, right, as it comes over.
And it is mixing with the grains that are at room temperature.
That's right, yeah. So part of, I think, you getting used to this system, and getting used to any system, really, is knowing how many degrees are going to be lost when you bring that water over.
Right.
If you have it at this temperature and you bring it across and mix it with these room temperature grains, what's it going to kind of level out at? Because you want to hit a target in there, right?
Right. What is the equipment loss that you're going to experience as you mix in these grains and this hot water? That's the mash. Next step is one of these great German words we use a lot in brewing. It's the Vorlauf.
It's great.
Vorlauf.
Yeah.
So when we've mixed the grains and the hot water, there's all kinds of sugar and bits of grain and so on in there. And if we just drew this off into the kettle, there would be all kinds of grime and sludge from the grain that came with it. And we don't want that. So what we do, very cleverly, is take the liquid from the bottom of the mash tun and return it to the top of the mash tun for about 15 or 20 minutes. And then the grains, the crushed grains, this is why we wanted them to still have their skins. They form a kind of filtering layer to filter out all the gubbins. And so we're only getting that sweet, sweet wort from the mash. Again, I'm pausing for your questions.
Yes, that's exactly what we do. If you crush the grains too much, so it just becomes kind of an impermeable wall, right?
That can happen, yeah. Like if you mix flour and water, you're not going to be able to separate out the liquid from that mess after that, are you?
Sometimes people might hear the term stuck mash.
Yes.
Is that a stuck mash?
That is exactly what that is, yes.
Right.
When the grain bed maybe gets too compacted or the mash is too thick and it's very difficult to separate out the liquids from the solids. We only want the liquids in here. That's what we're after. And that is the next step, the loiter. So we move all of the liquids that are in the mash tun into the kettle where we're going to boil them.
I have a question, though, I think, prior to this.
Okay, no, go for it.
I like beers with rye in them.
Yes.
I like rye IPAs and other kind of rye adjunct beers.
Yeah.
But my understanding is that brewers do not like brewing. They like rye beers as well, but they don't like brewing with rye.
Correct.
I believe it's because it's quite sticky. And I don't know if it ends up with a stuck mash or just kind of leans that direction or it's kind of problematic. Is that the case?
That is the case, yes. So rye has a lot of, sticky stuff in it. So when you mix it with the hot water, it can get really sticky. And rye, and similarly to wheat, I think I'm right about this, don't have husks when we bring them in.
Okay.
So it's just the grain part. It doesn't have the husks.
Right.
And that can make filtering a bit more difficult.
Sure.
Good question. So the loiter is the next step. That's when we take all of that delicious sweet wort and transfer it into the kettle. This actually takes quite a long time. This is the longest single step in the brew house. It takes about 90 minutes to do all of that. Because as we're pulling the liquid out, we want to do that nice and slowly to make sure we get all of it, get all the sugars out from this grain that we have paid for, and then we rinse it from the top. That's called sparging. We rinse, add more hot water from the top, and take all of this water and transfer it into the kettle over the course of about an hour and a half, during which we are sort of carefully measuring and gradually opening valves and turning up and down pumps and so on. And that's called the loiter.
It's like being a DJ, right? Like there's just a bunch of dials and switches. Nobody knows what they do, including the DJ.
Correct.
But you kind of open them and you look a little stressed, and then you close one, and then you open it a little bit, and you go somewhere else. It's like that, right?
Basically, I put on a CD, and then I mess around with a whole bunch of dials and pretend that I'm doing something.
Your headphone, the cord just goes into your pocket. It's not connected to anything. This stage is important, right? Because as you said, we've paid for the grain. That was an aside, but it was an important point. We want to get all of those sugars off of that, right? Like that's our sparge, is to rinse all of that off to make sure we get as much as possible. And we're also trying to hit like a target volume of water.
Right,
aren't
in the
we?
kettle.
Yeah, in the kettle, because that's going to end up being the wort that goes into the tank to become beer. That's all correct, right?
That is all correct, yes. A target amount of wort in the kettle, and then a target amount of sugar in that wort. So that's how we've measured the grain, because we think we're going to get this much sugar out of it. And then we want to make sure that we do that. We want to make sure that we're very efficient on this step.
And it goes back to the beginning, doesn't it, right? Like if you're not milling also has an effect on how much of the extractable sugar you can get out, right? You
Absolutely.
don't mill it enough. Some of that's going to be left inside.
Some of those grains aren't cracked.
That's right.
And the water can't get in there to release those delicious sugars. So we take all that wort, we loiter it, transfer it into the kettle, and then we boil it in there for, it depends on the brewery. We do it for 60 minutes. Some breweries do it for 75, some for 45. Dogfish Head, didn't they do a 90-minute IPA?
Yeah, and a 120-minute IPA.
Boil the wort for 120 minutes. And this is where we add the hops. So hops need to be boiled in order to extract their bitterness. So that 120-minute IPA, I think they were adding hops the whole time and extracting a whole bunch of bitterness.
My understanding of 90 and 120-minute IPA is that they have some wild, like, every 3-minute schedule of adding hops. So someone is just there.
They must have another assistant
for 2 hours,
passing them the hops as they're putting them in
just
as well.
The alarm going off constantly and no time to sit down or do anything else.
More hops, more hops, more hops. So this is where we add the hops. The first, so for a 60-minute boil, we'd add some right at the beginning to get a lot of bitterness, some at about 30 minutes to get some bitterness and some flavor, and then some at 15 minutes to get more aroma and more flavor, and then some in the whirlpool, which is the next step, to extract their aroma. So once we've finished boiling the wort, we will whirlpool it in the kettle. We'll spin the wort around really fast, because as it boils, all this protein and gunk kind of coagulates out of the wort and sinks to the bottom. And we don't want that in the tank. We want to leave that behind. So the whirlpool is a very clever way, using some physics, of making sure that you leave all of that gunk behind in the kettle.
Mostly we're dealing with hop pellets in here, right?
Correct.
So we're dealing with hop pellets. We like hop pellets because they're easier to transport. They're smaller.
Easier to store.
I think they stay fresh longer, things like that. But you can get whole cone hops.
That is correct.
That's right, like the whole hop itself.
Yeah.
When you use that kind of thing, do you use it exactly the same way as pellets? Is it the whole same process? You put it in early, you're going to get more bitterness because you're going to cook it in there, you're going to boil it in there. You put it in late, you're going to get more flavor and aroma? Or is there a difference when you're using whole hops?
No, it's basically exactly the same. You tend to extract more bitterness from pellets because they dissolve more fully in the wort. But other than that, you're using them in exactly the same way, except when it comes time for cleaning up afterwards, because pellets basically just turn into a sludge. That's part of what coagulates and gets left in the middle of the bottom of the kettle. And then we can just flush them down the drain. Whole cone hops don't do that.
Right.
And you need to get in there and dig them out and then throw them away properly as compostable garbage.
Right.
Or something like that.
Right.
A little bit more involved. So after the whirlpool, we transfer the wort through a heat exchanger to cool it down and recapture all that heat that goes back into the hot liquor tank, and transfer the now cooled wort into a fermentation vessel, to one of our fermentation tanks. And this is basically the final step. We are trying to cool it down to the temperature at which we can add the yeast to the wort. If you add yeast to very, very hot wort, the yeast will just die. And that's not what we want. We want the yeast to live, thrive, and survive, to quote the Blues Brothers. And so we try to usually aim for a temperature of about 20 degrees in the fermenter. And that's where we add the yeast. And that's what makes it into beer. That is the magic of beer.
Is there any kind of yeast that enjoys hot temperature?
Yes.
Or a beer that's made with hot temperature wort?
Wow, you've brought it all the way back round to the beginning, because that beer is in front of us right now. It is Shibasaki Session. Incredible work there. And that is really professional podcasting.
Yeah. So I was at the meeting. I was at the what do we call it?
The production meeting.
That's the one. Yep, that's the one I was at for sure.
When the one week that I miss it. The 1 week that I miss the production meeting, and this is the one that you show up. So yeah, Shibasaki Session. We use fake yeast, which ferments at a much higher temperature. At 35 is what we do it at. And this is one of the reasons that we can chew through a Shibasaki Session fermentation in a very short order. I think we actually brewed this beer that we're drinking now about 2 weeks ago. It's already ready, whereas usually it would take about a month from brewing to drinking for a typical beer.
Do you want to talk about dry hopping at all, or are you saying that's not part of the brewing process?
Yeah, I think today let's just cover the brewing process. We can get into hops and hopping on a later...
Hop volcanoes even.
Hop volcanoes on a later podcast, perhaps. Yeah. But yeah, that's the brewing process. It takes all day, mostly because there is a lot of cleaning up to do when we are finished. So that's how you make beer. I'm assuming you'll be ready to take over the next brew now. I'm going to take the day off.
Yeah, we're going to do it right now?
Yeah, let's...
Fire it up. Let's go.
Let's go.
You can head home. Buddy. I'll make a beer.
Excellent.
Before we wrap this episode up, I have to apologize. I may have alarmed some of our viewers, or unnecessarily listeners, or unnecessarily excited them.
And some of our viewers.
And viewers, yeah. I made a social media post today.
Are we being cancelled?
The heading was important announcement with siren. Emojis? Are they emojis when they're things? Anyway, siren kind of icons on either side of that.
Sure.
Did you read this? Did you pay attention to our social media feed?
I was busy today. It was a brew day.
Right on. Anyway, the important announcement was about ice cream. And it turns out, after talking to a few of our customers, that when they saw a post from us that said important announcement, they got kind of equal parts excited and or scared nervous about whatever this announcement was about.
We're pivoting to being an ice cream business. Going to dump all this beer.
Yeah, I mean, in my defense, it is pretty important. Parm ice cream bars, which is like the premier kind of ice cream bar that exists in Japan. They have the regular ones that are available year round. Generally, it's like vanilla with chocolate coating. But they do seasonal ones as well, and I always get them. I love Parm. I don't eat a ton of ice cream, but when I do, it's basically that bar. I always pick up the seasonal one, and I've been waiting for literally years for them to do mint chocolate. I like Choco Mint, and that's what they have done. That's the seasonal Parm right now. It's Choco Mint. So that was my important announcement. Okay. And I spelled it out in the post, but the headline was important announcement.
And then there was a picture of a Choco Mint Parm.
I think people got, a little bit, like I said, excited / nervous about whatever was going on with us. So anyway, kind of an Orson Welles War of the Worlds situation. Sorry about that. Sorry to alarm everybody. People in Hokkaido had 2 big shocks today, didn't they?
There were people in Tachikawa running out into the street in terror.
That's right, yeah, just to find out it was about ice cream. It's a bit of a double whammy, too. I can tell you have something to say, but before you get to that, I discovered later on as well that on all of our feeds, on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram, I linked to what I thought was an official Parm ice cream account. And apparently on Instagram, that's not real. That is some kind of placeholder account that I assume, KGB spies are like trying to gin up a following that they can sell or manipulate somehow in the future. So anyway, I have changed that. Sorry to anybody who followed a North Korean front Parm ice cream account.
Fake Parm account.
Yeah.
Sounds like you had quite a busy day on social media
We
today.
both had busy days, didn't we? There's a lot that goes on around here. You don't know about.
I've got to say, I think Parm are leaving a lot of money on the table.
Okay.
We're all familiar with the chicken Parm. Just grill a chicken breast.
Do it already.
Grill a chicken breast, put it on a stick, coated in chocolate.
Yeah, stop teasing us, right?
I will eat that.
Yeah.
That or the eggplant Parm.
Not an ice cream flavored like those things.
No.
Ice cream
I
flavored
want
like chicken Parm.
an actual grilled chicken breast.
Frozen chicken coated in chocolate.
Oh, man, yeah,
it's an ice cream country.
Yeah. Well, no, they're going to have to figure out a way that the chicken can be hot and the chocolate can be cold.
Interesting.
They're going to have to figure this one out. Parm, I know you're listening. Get on it.
Consider the gauntlet cast.
You're leaving money on the table. That is about all that we have time for this week. Thank you to the Parm Company for listening to this podcast. Thank you to everybody for tuning in again this week. Hope you stay safe. Hope you have a good rest of your week, and we will see you again next time.
Thanks for listening, everybody. Check out new Shibasaki Session and Chocolate Mint Parm.